7 o'clock. Let's get started. I am Jessica Anderson. I'm a sailing and diving specialist with Navionics. Tonight we're going to be talking about catching, eating, and finding lobsters with Jim Chiefy Mathie, who is a world-renowned lobster hunter. Sorry, I'm getting messages up on the screen from Zoom. Okay.
Gotta go. No, I.
Somebody isn't muted, so I'm just looking for who I need to mute here. Okay, I think we have it covered now. So tonight we're welcoming Jim Mathie. He's a dive writer and an author. He's been working and diving in South Florida for many, many years. He is author of Catching the Bug, which is all about how to catch lobsters, find them, and even how to prepare them. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I have been diving in South Florida for over 10 years, working on 15 now, and as a free diver and scuba diver, and I lobster and spearfish. I also do this in the Bahamas, but only free diving. So Jim suggested that I start off with telling the story of that lobster there that you see in this picture. This lobster is actually so we were in Rum Cay, which is in the outer islands of the Bahamas. And that boat that you see me standing on was our sailboat. It was a 39-foot Beneteau. We lived on the sailboat for a year while we traveled the Caribbean and Bahamas. That's our dog, Sugar, in the bottom left corner. She went with us everywhere. And in fact, she was on this trip with me. We went out in the dinghy. It was Daryl, my husband, and me and Sugar in the dinghy. And we all went our separate directions, except Sugar stayed in the dinghy waiting for me. And we were in about 15 feet of water, and we were just free diving. And I went down and I saw that thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, my heart just about jumped out of my chest. It was so huge. It was like the biggest lobster I'd ever seen. And I got a hold of that thing, and it took me forever to get it out. But when I did get it out, it wrapped its legs around me. I thought it was never going to get it off of me. And I thought it was, when I finally got it off, I thought I was going to pop the dinghy, because it was a blow up dinghy, before I could get it in the dinghy. But I finally did get it in the dinghy and got back to the boat, and it fed us for many, many meals. It was quite the monster.
Yeah, what you find, I guess, Jessica, on those big ones is I think they actually catch you sometimes, you know?
Yeah, that's really more how it went. It was, I was after it, and suddenly it was after me.
Yeah. And sometimes that works to your advantage when trying to catch them, because they actually come out of their holes and they're kind of aggressive to you. Like, hey, what are you doing here? This is my spot. And that helps catch them sometimes, because you can just grab a snare and or net and tickle stick and get a hold of them. So yeah, good story. I love it.
Yeah. One quick note for the people that are viewing: if you have any questions, in your control panel through Zoom, you have a Q&A button. You can click that Q&A button and use that to type in a message to us, and we'll be able to see that in the Q&A section that we can see. So, and actually, it looks like somebody else logged in as me from another device, Jim. So you might have to manage the Q&A, because it just says that I can't see it from here. So
okay,
we'll be viewing the Q&A and answering your questions. So tonight we're going to talk about how you can find the lobsters, how you catch the lobsters, and even how to clean and prepare the lobsters. And again, if you have questions, you just use the Q&A button, and we'll answer as many as we can. The webinar should take about 45 minutes to up to an hour, depending on how many questions we have. And I would like to say a big thank you to Navionics for sponsoring this webinar. Navionics is a company that makes the charts for navigating, and we use Navionics throughout the Bahamas and the Caribbean when we were sailing. That's how I actually got involved with Navionics, because I totally believe in their product, and it kept us safe all through our travels. So thanks to Navionics for hosting us. And let's get started. So, Chiefy,
Yes.
you have 3 sections in your book: finding the lobsters, catching the lobsters, and eating the lobsters. So we're going to go over all of those sections tonight, it looks like.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to give it just an overview of things. This is the second edition. So the first edition, I think I did that 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and pretty much redesigned the second edition, reworked it, re-edited it. This is my first book, so I really kind of tried to upgrade this one. Added some new chapters, which I'll shoot in here. Chiefy goes global. So we talk a lot about, even though we're both from South Florida, spiny lobsters are all over the world. That's what's kind of cool. I do kind of make fun of the lobster. That's those, they call those lobster up there in like New England, ones with the claws. They have a tendency to say that those are lobster. I say that those are really more crabs, because they have claws, but only kidding. That being said, spiny lobster is all over the world. If you go to the Mediterranean, there's going to be a spiny lobster there. Hawaii, California, even in other locations around the world, there's 31 different species or varieties of spiny lobster. Now, we happen to know, our Caribbean lobster are, fairly prevalent in the Bahamas, the Caribbean, as well as as far south as Brazil. And then we get these lobster go all the way up to about North Carolina. And then when you get to Virginia, north is when you get those ones with the claws. So I do kind of talk a little bit about spiny lobster all over the world and how they're treated. I think one of the questions, Jessica, you had mentioned was about the Bahamas. How is that treated differently than the United States? So we can talk a little bit about that now, if you'd like.
Yeah, we did have some people on our forums as we were talking about and advertising this webinar. People were asking specifically about how is the Bahamas different in regards to hunting lobster, and what are some of the things that you might need to address when you're in the Bahamas as opposed to the U.S.
Yeah, and I don't have specific regulations in the book as far as the different locations, because they change a lot. Even Florida, I do have a list of the Florida regulations, but I kind of always was worried about that because they may change those in the future. But in the Bahamas, particularly, the main thing is nothing can be harvested on scuba. Everything has to be free diving. And that's a huge difference than what it's here in the in Florida. So that's number one. Number two is actually in the Bahamas, you're allowed to spear your lobster. So that we cannot do over here in Florida. We're not allowed to molest lobster at all. So no spearing or molesting lobster. The actual time frame is August the 1st to March the 31st. So similar to our sort of season that we have here, except they don't have what we call a mini season, which is to promote really the mini season, which is the last consecutive Wednesday, Thursday in July, is designed for the divers to get a kind of a head start of the commercial guys that put their traps out on August the 1st. And then August 6th in Florida is our regular season of commercial and recreational. The advantage of the mini season for us locally here, particularly in our area of the greater Fort Lauderdale area, is that we can get double the limit. And the limit is 6. That's the same as in the Bahamas, 6 per person, and also no egg-bearing females at all. And that's common throughout any type of area in the world, no egg-bearing females. The size, though, is a little different in the Bahamas. It's 3 3/8, which is the carapace, which is the hard shell. in Florida, it's 3 inches. And the key there is, and that's probably the biggest mistake folks make when they are diving, is they are required to have a measuring device in the water and measure the lobster in the water. That's key to Florida.
Yep, I've known a few people that have gotten caught for that, where they said, "Oh, I'll just measure them when I get to the boat. It's too much trouble to do it under the water," and then they get up to the boat and it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm on commercial boats sometimes. I'm on my boat, other people's boats. So we try, and that's a message that we send out to everybody. And it's more of a conservation thing. You're removing them from their habitat. You're getting back on the boat. You're remeasuring them, and then if they're too short, which some of these are obviously too short, then you throw them back, and then who knows where they end up. So to me, it's a conservation thing as well. So we try to stick by those rules as best as we can. Yeah,
absolutely. Good points. So as far as finding lobsters, I know that there are some specific techniques that you have called out in your book that would be extremely useful for all of us to hear, and some things that maybe usual lobster hunters they're just starting out, or maybe they do wrong, and some tips that you've learned specifically over the years of your lobster hunting.
Oh, okay, that's great. I tell you, one of the things. Hang on a second here. I just messed up here a little bit on this thing. A couple little tricks as far as finding lobster, because what I found, particularly on charter, dive charter boats, is you kind of have these group of people that do really, really well on finding lobster and catching lobster, and then for the most part, there's a lot of folks that don't do so well. And and actually, there's somewhere a statistic that's either 5 or 10% of the divers, of the recreational divers, actually account for about 90% of the recreational catch. So us old timers are pretty decent at catching spiny lobsters because we've done it for a while. But a couple tricks. First of all, I like to work an edge. What I mean by that is where the edge of the reef and the sand meet. It seems, for whatever reason, the lobster, because they are a nocturnal animal and they do like to hide in holes and crevices, so you will see them along an edge. So I kind of work an edge. Most of the time it's the eastern edge here, so that's kind of I'm working that edge. And then a really good trick is I may not see that lobster, but maybe from a distance I'll see a hole, and that hole has a little whiter sand than other parts of the sand. So something is in there that's kind of cleaned out that hole. Sometimes it's a lobster. The other thing is, if you see fish, small fish, bigger fish, lionfish, that's a big key to lobstering. They seem to cohabitate. They like the same terrain. They love the same area. Now, word of caution there. The lionfish are there. If you see a lionfish, look for lobster. Likewise, if you see a lobster, realize there may be a lionfish in that area. So I very rarely put my hand in a hole to grab a lobster. So that's a couple tips. But a lot of it is getting to know the reefs and where you are in the reef structure. We're very fortunate that here in our area we have 3 primary reef system, shallow in around 15 feet of water. Then it gets a little deeper out to about 40. And then we have some deeper stuff in the 60 to 70, and actually down even to 100 and even deeper than that. So you get to kind of know where you are. And I hit a spot on Monday off of Hallandale that we had kind of said, oh, look, this looks pretty good. We had a little map chart that told us, hey, this looks like a pretty good little area. We jumped in on it. Wow. Not only did it have tons of lobster, and it was only in 30 feet of water, but it had nice, huge hogfish. So boy, oh boy, Was that fun? So
Nice.
that was good. That was really good. I see a question, Jessica. Did you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Okay, it's from Joel, and it says, "Do you know when they're going to close down the no-take zone in Biscayne National Park?" I really don't know the answer to that. Close down the no-take zone. Is that sort of redundant? Close down the no-take zone. So maybe you want to explain that a little bit more, Joel, what you mean by that, okay? If you don't mind, okay? Because that's almost like two negatives. Close down the no-take zone. If it's a no-take zone, it's closed, correct? So just, if you don't mind, Joel, just help me out there on that question. But I'm not familiar with Biscayne National Park at all. I do most of my diving off of the greater Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach area. We do travel down to the Keys. And bear in mind, the Keys, overall, 90% of the harvest for spiny lobster is in the Florida Keys. Now, that's the commercial guys. So, you know, it's not uncommon as you go down to the Keys to see tons and tons of lobster traps. And so you're kind of competing with those guys. But that 10% of the spiny lobster that make its way, and I always think they're going north, you know, they're kind of making their way up to the greater Fort Lauderdale area, Palm Beach area. Then when you get past like Jupiter, whoa, then you get some big lobster because those guys have survived the gauntlet, you know. We don't have as many commercial guys that are harvesting with traps, say, as what they're doing down in the Keys. But we do have some. We have several, and I call it the Chinese effect, something relatively new where the Chinese are paying large dollars for whole lobster alive, and they ship them overseas overnight. And that's really impacted the harvest. Matter of fact, some Keys Fishery down in Marathon, they sold all of their spiny lobster to China. So it's affecting, you know, the price locally here for spiny lobster.
Wow.
They have to be alive, though. They have to be alive.
Huh. Yeah, that's really different. Usually,
Yep.
it used to be that it was only sold as the tails. So interesting.
Correct. And for the most part, that what happens is if they're missing antenna or legs, then they are considered dead, and they rip their heads off, and then they just sell the tails. But the rest, if they are harvested commercially and they are whole and they're alive, then they ship them for overseas. They're making some decent money because they're paying them a good amount of money for the whole lobster as opposed to just the tail.
Yeah.
So this is my buddy Jay. He took one for the team on this one. And essentially this is, you know, have a plan. And so, you know, we're familiar with the reefs enough where we're going to go out tomorrow and we're going to try our best to catch a few. They've been relatively shallow for this time of year. That's very unusual. When I say shallow, I'm talking 30, 35, 40 feet of water. So we'll start off there and see how that is. If we don't do very well, and we'll just hit a couple spots. We do a lot of what I call bounce diving, where we have a couple little spots that we want to try out and see how it is. If it's productive, then we hit some more of those similar depth in different areas, whether it be Pompano, Fort Lauderdale, Hallandale, or you know, Highland Beach up in Palm Beach. So we kind of have a tendency to spread our wealth around. You know what I mean? But we have to. It is a good idea to have a plan. That's really what I'm trying to say. Okay.
Would an example of a plan be something like bounce diving? I do have some other friends that are very consistent in their catches, and they all bounce dive.
Yes, and bounce diving, there's a cautionary tale, particularly if you're scuba, on bounce diving. You have to be careful, particularly, you know, don't bypass the safety of safety stops, particularly on depth. So bounce diving is good because you're able to just spend your time productive in one area and then move on to the next area. So your tank, essentially, instead of just drift diving, you're kind of bouncing in that area. So we'll do some of that, or what we will do, Jessica, is, all right, so I've got, let's say I have a south current and I want to start in this area, say off of Deerfield Beach, which is where I'm located. I have a spot with a south current that if I go to the south and a little to the east, you know, I start off at this one spot, then I hit another spot, then I hit another spot. So I have 3 or 4 in a row that are very, very good. And that's what I mean by a plan. So I know I kind of have, if I have a south current, this is what I'm going to try in this area. If I have a north current, these are the areas I'm going to try. So you want to try to extend your diving to include more of those good spots. That's I guess that's the point.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's something that I've seen consistently also, that the bounce diving definitely helps you spread out some more and kind of explore more areas. So that's a really good tip for people that haven't tried that before. But also, like you said, be cautious.
Yep. Hang on a second. I got a back question here from Joel. Enforce the no-take zone. Okay. I didn't think they were not enforcing the no-take zone. And then they've been talking for years about closing down a large section of Biscayne National Park to lobstering, spearing, and fishing. I'm wondering when they will close down this area of the park. The issue there that I know of is Biscayne National Park, because it's a federal park, is a NOAA park, but it lies within the boundary of the state waters on the Atlantic side, which is 3 miles. So there is still that, I don't know about you, you called it, they talk about, you know, kind of what they're doing there. I do believe that as far as the federal guys, the state guys really don't want to have the federal guys telling them what to do.
And there was something recently that there was a proposal to make much of the east coast of Florida a no-take zone at all, but it didn't pass.
Correct. Yeah, I was involved in the Our Florida Reef project,
Yeah.
and so I do believe there may be some future opportunities that they will do that. But for now, I mean, the cool part is the state has an excellent group of scientists that really monitor what's going on as far as the catch. The state of Florida harvests somewhere in the area of about 7 million pounds average per year. And they're regulated primarily on the commercial side, the number of traps, those kind of things. And those guys are located, by the way, down in Marathon. Very cool guys. They spend their whole day doing experiments and scientific research on, you know, keeping a healthy stock of spiny lobster. They also realize the value that it is to the diving industry, particularly in South Florida and the Keys, for being able to essentially walk off, particularly here. I mean, you know, Deerfield Beach, we have a beautiful white sandy beach. You walk off the beach and you can catch lobster right there, you know, swimming right offshore, whether it's Lauderdale by the Sea, Pompano, Deerfield, Boca, in my area. It's a pretty cool thing to do. So I think the state recognizes that, and that's that 3 mile boundary that we were talking about with the NOAA people. So there is that little bit of I guess disagreement on things. So yes. Yeah. I don't know if that answered Joel's question, but that was my response. Looking for the cluster of lobster. All right, clustering, you know, unlike the other kind of lobster up north, spiny lobsters actually like to cluster together and at certain times. And boy, we're always looking for the mother lode. You know, the area where there's not just one, but there's 20, you know, and you pick out the 6 biggest ones, and then you put them in your bag and you call it a day. And it's been a good day. So, you know, that's what you're looking for, and they will cluster at certain times of the year. They do a migratory walk, particularly after tropical storms. Even the scientists don't know why they do it. They just know when they'll do it, which is changes of atmospheric pressure, tropical storms. We will get a walk, and they'll literally walk in the sand in a line, one behind the other, on a migratory walk. And it's a pretty cool sight to see, which I have seen several times, and they're fairly easy to catch. What happens then is they're real shallow in the reefs, and they do cluster together. So when you see that where they are clustered together, boy, that brings a big smile to my face, being a recreational diver. A lot of fun.
So I've heard a rumor that they walk at night and never during the day.
Oh, no, that's actually, they are a nocturnal animal. So yes, you're right that they forage for their food at night. Correct. They're out of their holes. And then during the daytime, they'll come back into their holes. But literally, I have seen the migratory walk, the queue, during the daytime in broad daylight, sun is shining, and here they are in sand, one behind the other, in a marching line formation. It's a very cool sight to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've experienced the same thing that I have never seen it at night. Granted, I've done a lot less night diving, but I've seen it during the day. So
well, it's cool. What we will see is like you'll maybe catch it first thing in the morning, and lo and behold, absolutely, they'll be coming back into their holes from being out at night. So that is kind of a cool thing to see.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we're going to switch to step number 2. So we did step number 1, which is find the lobster. Now we've got to catch the lobster. In Florida here, we are allowed to use devices, just nothing that'll spear them. We are allowed to use nets and tickle sticks and snares. Those are your 2 primary ones. And what I did here was, old school is net and tickle stick, and I was an old school guy for a long time. Net and tickle stick, just because I got fairly good at it. And it's called a tickle stick for a reason, because all you're really doing is kind of tickling them out. And that's where I think the biggest mistake folks make is they're impatient. They see a lobster and they go, "Oh, a lobster." And they get that tickle stick and they jam it in a hole, and the lobster is going, "Hey, I'm out of here," and they back into their hole, and then they never find them. Or if you find yourself sticking your hand in a lot of holes for lobster, your technique needs to improve. Okay, let me tell you that. So tickling is the key. Be very, very gentle and very, very patient, slow. This is where you really want to work on that technique. Just very, very slow. Tickle, and what I call tap, 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 just maybe underneath, tap them, or get behind them and tap them just a little bit and have them come out. When you have, whether you're going to use a snare or a tickle stick, the snare you're using as a tickle stick as well. You're withdrawing it. There's a picture there to the right with a circle. That's Heather. She'd withdraw the snare all the way and using it as a tickle stick. So essentially you're tickling the lobster out, just tapping them out. The key there is, if you have a net, then you're going to put them in the net, and then you got to keep them in the net. You got to hold them. Then they're in the net. Then you got to get them out of the net. So it kind of gets a little cumbersome. That's why I switched to the snare, and the snare is really easy. Once you get them out a little bit, you open up that loop on the snare, put it behind their tail, and boom, you've got them. And even the green snares have a lock on them. So then it's the moment of truth. Now, they've heard bad things, that if you get grabbed by a diver, it's not going to be pretty. And then, of course, you got to have the one-way trapdoor lobster hotel where the guests check in, but they don't check out. That's, just make sure that your Velcro or zipper is closed so that they don't back out the other way.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. I did that to my husband once. Yep.
Yes.
I had dumped out the lobsters from his bag, and then I forgot to zip it back up. And
Yep.
as he was on his next dive, he was collecting lobsters, and his friends were collecting them just as fast right
There
behind.
you go. They were very appreciative of that too,
Yeah,
weren't they?
they were very appreciative. He was not so much.
Yeah, hey, we've all done it. And so, yes, absolutely. Make sure that your zipper is closed. But I highly recommend the Lobster Hotel. It's worth and I want to say it's 40, 50 bucks or something like that to get that with the little trap door. Just make sure that you put them in tail first. Some folks will try to stick them in head first, and that doesn't work very well. Tail first works really, really well. But again, you should have your measuring device with you. I have mine attached to my lobster bag, so it's not going anywhere. And I just then measure them before I put them in. Obviously, and I mentioned it briefly, but obviously, if there's any eggs, egg-bearing females, you absolutely, let them go right away. And for the most part, you can see them when you catch them, but double check. We always double check anyway. So
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, definitely. It's always really disconcerting to get to the surface and have a lobster with eggs, and you have to be sure to let them go as soon as you see that. So that should be the absolute first thing you check for. Check for eggs, and then you can check this.
Yeah, if they have eggs, you don't even measure them. It's
exactly.
I have a good buddy of mine that's an FWC officer, and he says if you get caught with egg-bearing female spiny lobster, that's an auto ticket. That means you're going to get an automatic ticket no matter what your excuse is. Okay, so you might be able to talk them out of, hey, it was just short, type of thing, but you ain't going to talk them out of that one. So, but yeah, take the big boys first. Nice slide. I love this one. This one, my good friend Steve Waters, who's the outdoor writer for the Sun Sentinel. He, oh God, this picture goes back 5 or 6 years now. It was the first day of lobster season. And that actually made the national news, that picture. My dad saw it. Hey. This was a big one. This was about a 6-pounder that a buddy of mine actually caught. I just helped him put it in the bag. But of course, it was the picture that said everything. And if you read the fine print, it says that my buddy Kyle Van Busker caught it. But the key there is when you get into a cluster of lobster, you want to try to grab the big one first. It's a kind of a habit that we have. This way, you know, hey, if you grab the biggest one and that one's short, then there's no sense in messing with the rest of them. So don't waste your time. So those are little tricks that you learn, but try to grab the big boys first. And in this case, when you do see the big ones, that's a clue that the walk is on or they're moving around, because the big ones are in, particularly if they're in shallow. That's a good sign that we're going to have a good year. And this year's been a great year. We've been catching lobster and getting our limit almost every time we go out. And here it is. We've got about a little over a month left to the season. And it's been a great year. So no complaints here.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really, really good point, that you should go after the big one first, because it's really amazing how when you see a group of lobster, how one of them, the biggest one, just looks huge because the other ones are smaller. And then sometimes you catch it and you're like, oh, that's not big enough either. But it just looked so big. So
now what the big boys, because they didn't get that big because they were stupid. They let the little guys be the scouts out front in the hole a lot of times. Okay, so sometimes you kind of have to work your way to get to the big one, but try not to disturb the pack, because then once you start doing that, then they're all going to go scattering like heck or burying themselves in the hole, and then you're going to have trouble. But that's a good picture, and a good friend of mine, Steve Waters, put that one in. This is a fun story. Actually, Steve Waters wrote about this one, and I had to follow along when I did the second edition. A short in John's shorts. So John here, with he's shown a nice sized lobster, but he was down there with his buddy Andy, and supposedly Andy inadvertently, got a short and let it go in John's direction, and he didn't realize it, supposedly. That's what Andy says. He didn't realize it, but it went up John's shorts. So he doesn't wear a wetsuit. He has swim trunks, right? So all of a sudden, John looks down, and this lobster's settling in, and the antenna's hanging out of his shorts. So they finished getting all the lobster that they could. And it's a funny story. So the only way he could remove or extricate the lobster from his shorts was to drop his drawers underwater. So when John's pointing to his private area, Andy's going, he doesn't understand. And then when he realized, oh boy, there's a lobster in his shorts, Andy said, no, that's all you, buddy. I'm not helping you on that one. So that was a fun story. We howled, and but there's a moral to the story. The moral is that the shorts will actually come back into the same hole. So there's a funny, it's a funny story, but I bring that back. So we have a good time when we do lobstering. It's a lot of fun.
with a happy ending to the story, right?
Happy ending, yes, very good. All right. Hang on, I see some questions here. Hold on. Wait a minute. Joel's asking, is it illegal to touch the rock where the lobster is hiding with your hand? Does it make a difference if the rock is live or dead coral? Actually, I got to admit, you want to really try to not touch anything down there as best as you can. I mean, that's one of the conversations that we have with divers is try to protect the reef. So, you want to try to not touch the corals, the live corals, and for sure, it will definitely hurt and harm the coral. What is the most effective way to grab, handle a lobster when you catch it? And Lawrence is saying that, there's a couple different techniques. Some guys will actually, when they grab a lobster, they'll actually take the tail and tuck it underneath and hold it, because the tail is the thing that they'll actually start kicking a lot with. And that, first of all, you got to have gloves. If you don't have gloves, you're going to get torn up. They call them spiny lobster for a reason. I particularly like to grab them from underneath, and I grab the two antenna down by the knuckles, down by the carapace head, and I squeeze that, and that actually helps control the lobster a little bit. Then it exposes the top area, which is where the horns are between the eyes, and that's where you can measure the carapace. Again, I have some pictures of that in the book, and FWC does a good job. The Florida Wildlife Commission, it's myfwc.com. They have a good website, and they'll show you how to do that. Probably the key there on your measuring is there's a little membrane between the two eyeballs. That's just the two antenna. I mean, the two horns are protecting, and you have to be real careful. Don't include that membrane in your measuring, because that will give you a false measurement. So it's greater than 3 inches. So your measuring device should be 3 inches in the state of Florida. Okay.
Yeah, very good points.
Good. How to clean lobsters, serving ideas and recipes. Hey, this is what I like. I learned myself. So go to the next. There you go. Okay, really cool is a D-Vein Lobster Tool. A good buddy of mine, Scott, invented this. And I was at the Blue Wild this past year, and he actually gave me one. He goes, "Here, Jim, try this out." And I'm looking at it. I'm going, why would I? Well, he gave it to me, but I'm like, why would I spend? It's $15 for this. And I'm going, when I have free antennas, right? So you see the picture over there to the right with my buddy Chuck. He's cleaning out the intestinal tract there. So I go, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. And I put it aside. Now, remember, it was April, the Blue Wild, and so it wasn't lobster season. So, but I'm going to tell you, when we had mini season, in July, and we had 60 lobster to clean, that D-Vein tool was awesome. I ended up call on my buddy Scott and say, hey, I'm going to buy like 20 of them and give them to my friends. So that's exactly what I've done. They're the best tool around. And I feel bad almost because, I mean, the thing doesn't break. It's phenomenal. It's great. It's an easy way to clean lobster tails, multiple, lobster tails. If you're going to get one or two, stick with the old antenna. But if you're going to catch your limit, it really helps out a lot. So a cool little device, that's out there that you go, hey, it's a pretty neat device. I like it.
I definitely got to invest in one of those. It's often my job to clean.
Oh, you're the cleaner?
Yeah, while other people are cleaning the boat, I'm cleaning the lobster. We have one person cleaning fish, one person cleaning lobster, and I tell you, the antenna is like breaking off the antenna, and then like inevitably the antenna is too floppy, or it breaks off, or something happens. Totally get one of these.
Yeah, so the D-Vein tool is a really cool device, and my buddy Scott invented it. So really, really neat guy. So I definitely would recommend getting one. So really good. All right, I got a couple more questions here. Says, will this webinar be available after its live broadcast?
Yes, it will. We are recording it, and it'll be available on the Navionics website under webinars. And we'll also be sending out an email after the webinar. It's a couple days after the webinar, I think, that will have a link to the page on the Navionics website where you'll find the recorded version. Gotcha.
All right, so I got a couple more questions. We have time for questions now, Jessica?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a few recipes we can go over, and with 7:40, so we have time for questions.
Yeah. Lindsay, it says, what type of gloves do you recommend? Any brands that work best? Personally, I like gloves that fit well. I don't like bulky gloves. Some guys will just buy bulky kind of gloves, and it doesn't work for me. But I also I go for the cheapest ones because usually the most expensive don't really work really well and they don't last. But I like the ones that have an area on your wrist, that cover the area on your wrist. So they'll have like a strap or something like that. So inevitably that area between like your wetsuit, and by the way, I always wear a full wetsuit. Just even though it's 85 degrees, I wear a full wetsuit, particularly arms and legs. It'll maybe, a 3 mil. That 85 degree temperature is a little chilly. So I'm giving them a hard time. But I don't really have a brand that I recommend, other than I do look for the kind that has the area between the wrist, by the wrist, between the hand and the wetsuit that'll cover that. I have two questions from Ian. I dive primarily at night for lobster in Hawaii, and that's actually a very common thing to do. I got a buddy of mine, Kevin, that owns Hammerhead Spear Guns that's out in Hawaii. Do you do much night diving in Florida? And yes, we do. And they're just walking around at night. That's the difference. At night, the lobster are not in one area like they are during the daytime. Any thoughts on using red lights to reduce spooking the bugs? I don't know much about that, so I don't really know that answer. Ian has a follow-up question. Any tips of baiting out the big boys that are out of reach to deep under ledges and in holes? That's a good question. I know up in the Jupiter North area, they have it's almost like a pool extension thing that's like 10 feet because they have deep ledges. So they actually take the device and drag them out, type of thing. But you got to remember, these are huge. When you get up to like the Melbourne area and Jacksonville area of Florida, these guys are telling me these are huge. So it's pretty neat to see. So, all right. Secret recipes. Here we go, Jessica. Do you have anything for us on this one?
Secret recipes. Well, when we lived on the sailboat, I tell you, we lived off of lobster for months at a time, and I think I might have tried nearly every way humanly possible to make lobster, including lobster crack, which is it's
fried lobster, right?
So you can fry the lobster first, but it gets so much more in depth because you do sour cream and cream cheese and buffalo sauce, like buffalo wing sauce.
Oh.
Cheese, melted cheese, and the fried lobster all cooked in together and put it on top of pizza crust, or you can use it as a dip, and it is absolutely delicious.
Oh, Jessica, you're going to have to give me that recipe because that sounds like a winner. My wife does make what we call cracked lobster. So it's like cracked conch, it's fried, lightly fried, and just a little flour with some, I wouldn't say breadcrumb, but that's not it. Cornmeal and back and forth, little egg dip, and then just really lightly fry it, and then you're all good to go. But my go-to recipe is, is I use Chef Paul Seafood Magic, which has just enough. I don't like things overly spicy, and of course olive oil and butter. So how can you go wrong? But the state of Florida actually has a really good bunch of recipes for all fish. The state of Florida actually has a chef. That's what his job is to find different recipes for the different seafood that we have. So it's fl-seafood.com. And you go there and they've got some great recipes for seafood. So not just, spiny lobster, but now the one down there in the bottom, the pictures down there in the bottom is when we get a big one, this, Chuck's my man here. When we get a big lobster, we love to cut it in half, clean out the head, and then stuff it with either crab meat or lobster meat. Why not? Little breadcrumb, bake it, and then broil it on the top. And of course, not lots of butter and everything else. And the presentation is phenomenal. And of course, it'll feed a large family. And so it's great. But my go-to recipe, if you told me, Jim, tonight's your last meal, okay? Tonight's your last meal is I would core out the lobster tail from the shell. So what that is not just that I cut it in half, and I do actually have a step-by-step instructions in the book where you turn the tail upside down, just get it started where you kind of cut that meat that's hanging off the edge, and then you put it in there and you make that turn all the way around and core it all out. So all that whole white lobster meat is coming out. None of that chewy, which is going to be the next shell. That's how they grow, is they get bigger like that as the shell is in there. So you remove all that. All you have is that pure white, and then you can do whatever you want. Saute it. That's my recipe for lobster.
Yeah, I do agree with your presentation comment that when we have guests that are especially out of the area and they're not used to lobster, it always is a huge hit if we keep it kind of like the bottom picture here, or where you have it in the shell. It just really blows people away.
Yeah. And the fact that we can literally, like I said, swim off the beautiful white beaches and catch lobster, it's actually pretty good. We like it. Yeah. You still there?
Yep.
Okay, it looks to me like I might have another question here. I'm looking through them, trying to scroll through them. Nope, I think that's it. Okay, that's it on that. What we have here at the end of the day, it's all about having fun. That's you hit it on the head. These same guys that over here to the left are the same guys that I dive with every mini season, and that's 60 lobster right there from 5 of us catching 12 lobster on mini season on the first day. And it's the same guys and, the same group of guys we deal with all the time. So, we may lose 1 or 2 along the way due to whatever, but we grab a couple more in between. So it's all about having fun and enjoying the day. That's what makes it great.
Does the dog go out on the boat too?
No. That's Baxter. We don't take him out on the boat. He'd be in a big trouble. You know, he's the one that when you're filleting the fish on the fillet table and all the guts and everything and the scales are coming down, he's underneath there kind of licking up. So we got to throw him in the pool afterwards to clean him off because he's a big mess. Yeah. He'd be right in the middle of it.
Sounds kind of like sugar.
Yeah.
That's mine.
Yep. If people are interested in my book, which is Catching the Bug, second edition, or I also have Catching the Spirit, which is the ABCs of spearfishing. Really a good overall book on free diving, shallow water blackout problems, predators, a lot of safety. It's the 3 R's and the 4 S's of spearfishing. So if you're interested in that, you can get either of those books at my website, chiefy.net, which is through PayPal, or Amazon.com, or locally in Florida, I think from Orlando south to the Keys, most dive shops have my book or have access, to get my book. So
yeah, most of them do have them out in plain view for everybody as soon as they walk in. I've seen it in many, many dive shops.
Well, it's a good package deal. That's what I'm encouraging dive shops to do that. Why not sell a snare, a bag, and a Catching the Bug book? I mean, why not? Make it a package deal. So, and you might as well throw in the D-Vein tool too. So, I think makes great, as far as a retail end. So very good.
And a great gift, by the way, too.
Good. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, if you have friends that are divers, and that's a great gift, a little package deal like that.
Cool.
Yep. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you so much, Jim, for telling us all of your tips and tricks, and for joining us for the webinar. You had some great suggestions.
Good. Loved it.
So those of you that have that are still on, I know we have a couple people dropped off. If you're still on, you will be getting an email. Even if you aren't still on, they will also be getting an email shortly with links to the recorded version on which you'll find on the Navionics website under the webinar section. And if you have any further questions, you can also respond to the email. It'll come to me, and I will coordinate with Jim to answer any other questions that you have if you do come up with any questions afterward. So thank you again for joining, and check out the Navionics website under webinars for all of the other webinars we'll be hosting coming up. Thanks, everybody.
Good.